With us now to talk about his news-making interview with Donald Trump here in Cleveland, New York Times national security correspondent David Sanger. We talked a little bit about some of the substance of it. I just want to talk about tone. You've interviewed a lot of world leaders and candidates. Does this guy seem like a man in command of these issues, or more casually connected to them than most, or some?
I think he's somebody who's trying to learn them, and I think he's serious about trying to learn them. But he's had a different upbringing than those of us who, live in Washington and sit around at dinner parties and occasionally, I've been to a few, I realize you guys would never do this, discuss NATO enlargement, okay? Yeah. Right? And so I think that he doesn't have the terminology down yet, he doesn't have the code words down yet, and that's fine with him because the message he's trying to send is, if I become president, I'm going to really shake things up, and it's not going to be the way it was, and so you shouldn't count on the alliances the way they were.
So to sit down with you, Maggie Haberman was there with you, but to sit down with you at this particular moment seems to be like a very purposeful thing to do, in the middle of this convention, wanting to send a message. Was there anything about the things he said that you felt like that was not purposeful? Or was this all like very much, these were the things he wanted to say? The trouble he got in today was trouble he wanted to make with allies around the world and with others criticizing him?
Well, he didn't know what we were going to ask him about, but we did have a lengthy interview with him in March where we took up some of the similar topics and we tried to go beyond it here. I think that he wanted to show that in addition to the pageantry of a convention, that he's also dealing with the substance of what it would be like to be commander-in-chief. And frankly, I think the message that he sends out, which is fundamentally one of the allies can't expect a free ride, something you've actually heard from President Obama and you've heard from people like Bob Gates and others, he adds another line, which is, and if they won't pay up more, we're going to cut off what we're doing for them. Now that separates you out from the question of what are the American interests in having forward deployed troops? What are the American interests in keeping NATO together? And I'm not sure that he has spent a huge amount of time on those issues at this point, or who's advising him on them.
Talk about his instincts. Again, people say, well, like Reagan didn't know a lot about the Soviet Union or about nuclear weapons, and yet people credit him with someone who had instincts about sort of the right big picture gut decisions. Does he seem to have those? Is that what's animating these answers?
He's got a lot of instincts, but not surprisingly, they are the instincts that come from negotiating development deals. And so it's a very transactional approach to American foreign policy, whereas his party has had for 70 years a very relationship-building approach to American foreign policy. That we build up the NATO relationships because you never know what's going to happen in the world and you need a bulwark against some kind of adversary. And then after the Soviet Union fell, remember NATO was in search of a mission, but found it first in Yugoslavia, then some in Afghanistan and elsewhere. I think that he does not come to this with sort of a big mission picture. His view is the United States can take care of itself. So he's coming to it with each interaction is a discrete transaction. And that's where he and the party establishment, the foreign policy establishment, would separate.
So transactional, sees a lot of these issues through an economic lens, not a security lens.
That's right.
Is there a philosophical underpinning that you think you can find? I mean, is he some hodgepodge neocon? Realist, isolationist? What's the picture of that on that front?
I was struggling with that at the end of the last interview, and that's when in March, and that's when I said to him, if I had to characterize this, I would characterize it as America first. And I was expecting him at that time to say, no, this is not like the isolationist movement in the days leading up to World War II. But he said, no, he liked America first. And I came back to it yesterday, and he said, the reason that I like the phrase, and this is in the transcript that we've posted on the New York Times website, the reason I like the phrase is I'm thinking of it in terms of today. It has no historical resonance for me. Now, I think for many others, and certainly for older Americans who are thinking back to Lindbergh and that whole moment in time, it's got a huge historical resonance. But he said not for him.
One of the most striking things to me is he said something that you might hear from a Cuban leader, basically saying, our house is not in order. We have problems here in America with race, et cetera, and therefore we're not necessarily in a position to criticize other people. Is that something that's a departure from what a lot of American leaders would say?
Certainly. I think what you would hear from President Obama, what you used to hear from President Bush is, we are not a perfect nation, long way from it. You certainly hear this from President Obama on race-related issues. But he says, we are striving in that direction, and look where we've gotten from, say, the 1960s civil rights movement to today.
But it's quite something to say we don't have the standing.
That's right. What the argument he's making is a little more like what you hear if you read the Chinese or the Russian press, where they say, who are they to lecture us? They've got Ryan, they've got Ferguson, they've got bigger issues themselves, and so they should stick their nose out of our business. We're not telling them how to go deal with their own.
It's an interesting thing I don't think he would necessarily agree with the statement that almost every other president would, which is that we are the indispensable nation. It doesn't feel like he believes that.
I think that he would probably say, we are the most powerful nation, and we are willing basically to offer up that power if we are compensated for it.